Programming Throwdown, episode 55, Editor Wars. Take it away, Patrick.
Well, first I want to open up with a discussion about vacation. So it's the summer. People with children in school or in school themselves often think about vacation this time of year. I tend to actually be the opposite since I do have kids, but they're not school age. I try to take my vacations during the school year.
Yep.
And so that way it's cheaper and less crowded. And I'm basically a curmudgeonly old man. And then I came across an article about mandatory vacation and should it be required at tech companies. And there's an article we can link, but it got me thinking. And also I wanted to share, there was an interesting example in here where at bank companies insured by the FDIC, specifically the government has rules, and they say that you have to take at least 2 weeks of vacation per year for people in certain roles. And the reason being that if you're cooking the books at a financial institution and you take a vacation for 2 weeks, that there's a much higher chance that someone will catch that the books are being cooked while you're gone, because you have to kind of make edits on a daily basis to make everything match up in the ledgers. And if you are gone for 2 weeks and someone else has to do that, you'd have to collude with them.
I see.
And so, most of the time, collusion the risk is too high because you have, we could get into game theory, I guess, but there's a reason.
If you have 100 people, if any one of them
defects,
breaks the rule,
right.
And then also if you have 100 people and someone breaks the rule, you don't know which one. And so, as soon as it gets more than one person, it's very hard to... Which
is also a convincing explanation I've heard about why conspiracy theories in general don't work, is because they have too high of a rate of the defector problem. Like, given the conspiracy, someone would defect at some point, and you would know about it, and it wouldn't be a conspiracy anymore. And so this is basically talking about that, someone cooking the books, and then they take a vacation, and then the bank is able to notice it because the other person isn't cooking the books. And the person writing the article wasn't suggesting that the same thing is happening at tech companies, but they had a good point, which is if you force people to take at least 2 weeks every year consecutively away, that it forces code to be like maintainable and documented. And I've noticed this before. My team always freaks out if I'm going to go on vacation for even a week. Like, make sure everything's in order before you leave, blah, blah, blah. And then they never do anything while I'm gone because like a week isn't enough. I don't even know if 2 weeks is enough actually, but it's probably more than 1 week where people have to do stuff while you're gone. And that requires the system to be capable of handling it, because people could get sick or like go into the hospital or have a family emergency and be gone for 2 weeks. And so forcing each person in the company to be gone for at least 2 consecutive weeks would make sure that regiment is followed. In addition to the people going away, not thinking about work for 2 weeks and coming back, will just have like a renewed clarity to their mind about what they're working on. Thoughts?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that as far as, making your code kind of more sort of document friendly and more, developer friendly, like rotation is also good for that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You don't want to be the guy on, Team X for 10 years and you know everything about Team X, and no matter how hard you try to document, there's always going to be something that is just so you're so unconsciously aware of that you don't document it. And so as soon as you go on vacation or change teams, everyone realizes, oh, we totally missed the secret sauce that makes Project X work. And so vacation is one way to do that. Rotating is another way. But yeah, I know some people, and you probably also, Patrick, know people who never take vacation.
Yes.
Like there's a max on vacation. At some point, you stop accruing it. There's people who just they lose vacation time. And just that blows my mind. Like I don't think I could focus if I went 3 years without a vacation.
Sometimes I don't take vacation for a while and I really get like that, like, oh, I really need to just take a day away or 2 days away. But then other times, I feel like I go long stretches where I'm okay. And if the work is engaging and not overstressing, I do. I also don't end up ever running out. And it depends on your company too, like how many weeks of vacation. And the other thing I found is that different companies, if they have like less vacation that you're able to take whenever you want and more like company given vacation, like, oh, we're going to give you this week of Christmas off. So, we're going to give you less vacation because we give you this week of Christmas off. Like that matters too, because you can't decide when to take your vacation. And so different companies have different like balances of how they give their vacation. And I think that plays a lot as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it would be interesting to have to be away for 2 weeks in a row. But I wouldn't like to be told that I had to take all my vacation at once.
Yeah, I've always taken just kind of small, like little mini vacations, but a lot of them, like, 2 or 3 a year. Yeah, I mean, taking 2 weeks, it would be kind of weird. Yeah, I think it would be kind of weird to be gone for a whole 2 weeks.
But I think they have good points about making sure I think there's a belief amongst a lot of people that the best way to assure your value to the company and to get paid the most or whatever is be irreplaceable, that no one knows what you're doing. Oh, they know what you're doing, but no one knows how to do it. And so they have to keep paying you and keep you around, or else everything would crumble. But I feel like that's a very fragile system that people I know
I don't think that's sustainable.
It does work for some people. I can't deny it, but I've seen more people be successful at being like over communicating, documenting everything, making the system so anyone could run it. And then I think companies long-term do value that.
Yeah, right.
And that gets rewarded higher than the guy who keeps all the secrets, or lady who keeps all the secrets.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
Cool. On to news.
So I have the first link. This is a good resource. And I know, so a lot of you will probably, I don't know, this will be helpful, but many of you I know are learning programming, and with learning programming, at least for me, they were tied together. When I first learned programming is when I first started Encounter Linux, way back in the day.
Yeah. What was your first Linux?
I don't even remember now. I guess it would have been, I think probably some sort of the early Fedora.
Yeah, I think it's the same. For me, it was Mandrake, which I actually don't know what happened to Mandrake.
It wouldn't have been called Fedora at the time. I guess it would have still been Red Hat. I don't remember how the open source thing. They changed like Fedora and Red Hat. I don't remember, but one of those flavors.
Oh, I see. Apparently, Mandrake is now called Mandriva, but I guess it's still going. Oh, no, sorry. The last release was 4 years ago.
Oh.
So, yeah.
But they were kind of tied closely together. And I will say that for a lot of programming tasks, that aside from application programming, but if you're doing like system level programming, Linux seems to be a necessary requirement. At some point, you'll come across it. And this website, linuxjourney.com, has a very nice organization of topics, and then like little, I've seen this style more and more now. I don't actually know what it's called, but like wiki books or whatever, where it's like topics on the left, and then you're reading the text on the right, and it's a way to navigate a book. And they have a whole bunch of resources along with like quizzes and like highlights about various topics in the Linux operating system, like how to search, what is the boot process like, how does piping work, just all sorts of different little topics. And I feel like there's a lot to learn there. And everyone makes Linux out to be like very, very hard. And it's just one of those things that depends on how you're using it and what depth you need to go to. But if you're trying to learn Linux, or you found yourself stuck, or just looking for another resource, because I know for a long time it baffled me and I never really kind of got it. And I'm still not like there's those Linux people, and I'm very happy that they're around, and I always like to make sure one's like within arm's reach of me. But it's never been me. But now I know enough to hurt myself, and probably not enough to help myself out of the problems.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, I'm still getting to the point where I get things like kind of really hosed and I have to reinstall. But yeah, I think it's an incredibly useful skill. I mean, there's a lot of like useful things for programmers to know just by going through Linux. Like, for example, the idea that there are these pipes, and you instead of using the console to print debug statements, you actually write your result to the console, and you read your result from what's called standard in, which is the console input. And if you do that, kind of, and you abide by a few laws, then you can be part of the Unix stack. So someone can do ls, pipe it to grep, and then pipe it to xargs, and then pipe it to your program, and it would just work. It's just kind of magic, right? So it's definitely incredibly useful. And this tutorial looks awesome.
Yes, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and hopefully that'll be a good resource to you, because it is a tough topic, and even just knowing what you don't know. So this one's cool because as opposed to finding on Stack Overflow how to do something, which is also very useful. This kind of gives you this things you should be looking for as you advance in your Linux skills.
Yep. So yeah, my news is OpenAI Gym. This is pretty cool. It's like a set of benchmarks for a machine learning like AI algorithm. But the benchmarks are all kind of cool to watch. I mean, there's one where it plays Breakout. It's also called like Arkanoid, which is this game where you're a little, I guess, rectangle, and there's this ball, and you have to like bounce the ball off the ceiling. There's like all these other Atari games. There's actually Doom, so you can have an AI that plays Doom. And usually when you do these kind of things, like there's a StarCraft AI competition and things like that aren't part of the gym, but these other competitions, it's always like such a hack. I mean, think about it. You have to, write some AI and then force that AI into StarCraft without having any kind of API or anything. It's very hacky. And so these guys have done kind of all the hacky things for you. And so they provide a very nice API where it just says something like, here's a picture of the screen, the like what you would see if you were playing Doom. And then maybe they even give you extra hints, like, actual location where the enemies are. So you don't have to do any image processing or anything. And you build the AI on top of their API. And another thing is really cool is they have examples. So you can actually, I think one of them is like a deep neural network that can play these games. And so you can download this GitHub project and you can train it on your computer. And then when it's done training, you have this like Doom AI or this Atari AI that's like pretty powerful. So yeah, this is super cool. If you're an AI enthusiast, definitely check it out. Even if you're not, they have step-by-step installation instructions. Like if you just want to see an AI play one of these games, you can follow the instructions without being an AI wizard or anything, and you can have something that actually works. It's pretty sweet.
I think it's interesting. The people talk about AI development in games, but it's different writing the AI like you're talking about, where you're simulating the player and the interface is the screen. And you have to do image processing, or maybe they give you something a little more. And writing like in Doom, like the bad guy AI, and the bad guy AI, the programmers have the opportunity to expose any variables from the world they want to that AI to help it operate, and could in effect cheat, and then even turn down the cheating for different difficulties. But as the AI you're talking about, you don't have that level of access, especially not if it's not implemented by the game itself.
Yeah, right. I think actually the AI of the enemies is kind of interesting. I mean, if you think about it, like in Mario, if the enemies had some clever AI, that game would be so hard. Like, I mean, all the turtles and the Goombas, like they would just band together. I mean, I guess some of them are trapped by the terrain, but they would just band together and just stack up or like fall on you when you try and jump onto this pipe and just kill you, And so that game only works because all of the individual patterns of the enemies are very simple. Like if all the enemies moved randomly, it'd be so hard. And so it's kind of interesting. The whole AI problem for the game agents themselves is super interesting for like a different reason. But yeah, I mean, this is all about being able to play the games, and that's like a different kind of problem, but still kind of interesting in its own right.
I see a lot of stuff for games like real-time strategy and stuff about whether the AI can quote-unquote cheat, because there's this notion like if you're in Civilization or whatever and the computer knows you're taking a certain path, they could kind of choose something that is strong against that path and thereby creating a harder AI, but in a way that if you played another human, they wouldn't be able to do the same thing, or at least not with certainty. And so you can kind of bake having a harder AI by just allowing the AI to cheat.
Yeah, definitely. And Civilization is notorious for this, but they also didn't have many resources in I guess the 90s when Civ 1 came out.
But even that is still an interesting thing, is to say that like understanding the game in a way that you can even figure out with all the information known in the world, how do you not just make some opponent that will win, because you could just like spawn an infinite number of enemies or something like, but that's not interesting. But, something that looks like it's behaving normally, even though it's has access to the world, but what information from the world is it choosing to use, and then still making it fun. Like, it isn't fun if it just like kills you instantly because it has infinite health and you have, normal health.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So you need to both be difficult, but like in a way that feels like a challenge and feels fun at the end of the day. And they have access to cheating by like making resources that you can't have, or cheating by having the world's information, but they still need to use it in a way that doesn't go overboard.
Yeah, you know what this reminds me of? There's one game that does something like this, and it's like a knockoff of Guitar Hero. I think it's called like Bit Trip Beat, or it's Audio Surf, or one of these games. But basically, you can give it any MP3 you want, and it will generate like a Guitar Hero kind of level for you. And you can even specify the difficulty. And so this is the kind of thing where, yeah, I mean, in this case, they have to sort of understand how the music relates to sort of these game patterns, and then also be able to ramp up and down the difficulty. Yeah, I think these things are super, super hard to build.
Yeah, I mean, and it's ultimately a game supposed to be fun. So you don't just have to make it and make it work, but you have to make it enjoyable at the end of the day.
Yeah, right. Yep.
The next article I have here is Learn Docker by building a microservice. If you hang out on any sort of web forum or Reddit or Hacker News or whatever, you see Docker all the time, or at least I do.
Yep.
And I kind of never really got what it was. Now I'm beginning to understand it, but I came across this tutorial and I thought it was really well done. And, I was like, there's lots of tutorials and some of them are not very well done, but I appreciate people trying to make them. But I also appreciate when someone does a really good job of making something that is pretty cool. So this person shows you how to use Docker, and it's a tutorial about Docker, but they use a real world example of bringing up a MySQL database and Node.js in a Docker image, or images, I guess, linking them together, and then using it to actually bring up essentially a website, a web server. And I thought this was really good, and it's really pertinent because it's something that I think we're seeing a lot more of, Docker get kind of traction. And there's other solutions, but I think once you understand one, it's, in my mind so far at least, they all seem similar enough. And this would be a great thing to learn if you're in school or applying for jobs, or even if you're in a job and trying to see, hey, is this something that can actually help solve the problems at my company?
Yeah, I mean, Docker is definitely a hard thing to explain. I guess, I mean, I'll try and do it.
Oh, you're going to try? Okay, here we go.
I'll try. There's virtual machines, which have been around for a while, and that is where you see people running like Windows inside of their Mac, or the vice versa, or Linux inside of their Windows machine, right? And so what that does is it pretends like you have sort of an OS inside of an OS. And so it actually, when the virtual machine says, I want to write to this part of this disk, that command goes to, your virtual machine engine, like let's say VirtualBox or something, and VirtualBox translates that into a command on your host machine, saying, oh, the person said they want to write to this part of the disk, but on the host machine, it's actually that part of that disk. And so right over there. And so it has to do this sort of translation. From what I understand, so like let's say you had a Windows machine and you had a Windows VM. Then in that case, like you could make a lot of assumptions. Like, you don't have to sort of translate everything. There's a lot of things that, like if you wanted to play a note, a music note on the VM, and you know that everything is Windows, you would just pass that command to the host and just say, hey host, play a music note. You wouldn't have to like do any translation. And so I think Docker sort of takes advantage of this. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have to keep the same OS. You can't run like a Mac Docker on Windows, right? It doesn't really work like that. And so granted that you want the same OS, Docker gives you this whole environment that's self-contained, but also very fast, and gives you raw access to like the GPU and things like that.
You did a good job describing like emulators, or at least like the OS emulators like VirtualBox. But I think the way I view Docker is a little differently. So there's a Windows version of Docker and you can run Linux VMs in it, and that's right. But Docker isn't really, I don't know, at least to me, the interesting part isn't about running the VM. And there's a whole bunch of hard technology problems they're trying to solve, but it's about this containerizing, which is about saying, yes, I'm going to start a VM, but I want a way of describing what should be in that VM so that it's repeatable. So if you take an example, like I want to write a MySQL database. So I'm just something that's going to use MySQL. So I just download one of these packages, install it and all of its dependencies on my machine. And I got MySQL running locally. And then I create my schema, I insert some data, and then I'm doing my testing. But then now I need to share that work with my coworker. Then I need to tell them or remember how I did all of that and like get MySQL installed on their computer as well. And then remember if I had to like install any patches or anything weird. And so what Docker kind of says, at least in how I use it, it does many things, but allows you to kind of create a text description saying, I want to pull an Ubuntu image down. I want to, in that Ubuntu image, run these commands to apt-get install these, services at this version. Then I want to start, MySQL service in that Ubuntu thing, or maybe you can just get a prepackaged MySQL Docker container. Then I want to link it with a Node.js container. And so I'm running two VMs as if they're running on two different machines. But then initially they're not really connected to anything because you don't want something bad happening. So you have to explicitly say, here's how I want them to be talking to each other. And then now as a developer, if I get that working on my machine, I can give it to my coworker and they can also like give them the description and they can also have it bring up and do the same thing. And then when we're ready to deploy to infrastructure, that can be run on a server. So the server can pull down those descriptions, build the images, and run those services in production, just like we were in development. And it kind of is a way of having a containerized thing that describes all of that, manages the packages, manages the workflow, and says how these things should be built so that they're repeatable and deployable. And you don't have to do this notion of keeping dependencies in sync across all your machines because you're kind of listing them all together.
I see. That makes sense.
So I probably butchered some of it as well. But it does that by using a VM like you were indicating. But I think like in the production, the idea is you want the host operating system to be a very, very minimal thing that's optimized just for running other VMs. And they call these like hypervisors or other things. And then each kind of image you want to be as minimal as possible because you don't need a lot of stuff. Each container is supposed to kind of only do one thing. And that's why, as this article insinuates, it's really good for microservices where instead of a monolithic application, you build, each service kind of individually and then they depend on each other, but they're not all one thing. And that has a lot of opportunities. It has some downsides too. And maybe we could get into that at some point, but it is an interesting approach and it does work for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's just cool. So I guess, if you're running two Docker images, and let's say one of them is your MySQL database, and that MySQL database blows up, like there's some bug in MySQL and it just gets out of control, then like at least the other Docker image can just say, oh, the database is blowing up. Let me tell like a 404 to the users or something, instead of the whole machine blowing up.
Yep. So, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So,
there's lots of reasons to do that, but yeah, I think that is a good reason. Yeah.
Cool. So my news story is FizzBuzz in TensorFlow. This is a kind of a troll, like a trollish story, but it's pretty funny. Basically, there's this interview question called FizzBuzz, and the idea is you print the numbers from 1 to 100, but if the number is divisible by 3, you print fizz. If the number is divisible by 5, you print buzz. And if it's 15, you print FizzBuzz. So if it's none of those, then you print the number. So for example, it'd be 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, so on and so forth, right? So this is like highly ridiculed as like a prime example of what not to do in a programming interview. Like what kind of questions not to ask. And there's just so many reasons. One, because so many other people have asked it. Two, because it doesn't really show kind of architectural skill or anything like that. There's just a ton of reasons. And so this guy, Joel Gruss, was in an interview. I don't know if the article is real.
No, because he's using it to explain.
Yeah.
He's using it to explain
sure
TensorFlow.
Yeah, the article is not real. There's no way, like on a whiteboard or whatever you would do this. So the article is not real, but it's funny to just like put yourself into this space and imagine this really happening. So in the article, an interviewer asked him to do FizzBuzz, and so what he does is he spins up TensorFlow, which you talked about in the past. TensorFlow is a Google created tensor matrix library that has a lot of objective functions, loss functions, all sorts of like things for building machine learning algorithms already included. And so he spins up TensorFlow and he builds a neural network to solve the FizzBuzz problem. And the interviewer is just kind of like, what are you doing? And he just kind of goes through the whole FizzBuzz thing. And then at the end he says, I didn't get the job. Thanks a lot, machine learning. It's just really goofy and funny. If you want to have like a nice lighthearted read and learn how neural networks work, and learn TensorFlow, check this out. At the end, he posts the code on GitHub, so it's not all in vain. Check it out; it's pretty good.
I think FizzBuzz isn't a bad question. I know it does have kind of a bad rap because a lot of people have used it, but I think in general, just with interview questions, it's difficult. You need to know as an interviewer, like what you're trying to get out of the interview. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Well, they do know. They're trying to stroke their ego. But that's my cynical criticism of it. But a lot of people don't know what they're trying to get out. And I think FizzBuzz does work for saying, I'm looking for an easy way to test if someone knows basic coding skills. It's not supposed to be algorithmically hard or architecturally hard. And it does that. Now, whether or not that's useful to the company that you're interviewing for, TBD. And this person, yes, I agree. I'm certain this is a joke, that this did not actually happen, that they were trying to be facetious in saying that they could use a neural network to figure it out. But also interesting, because maybe for any such pattern producing algorithm in an interview, you could do this.
Yeah. I always wondered, I used to do these programming contests, and I wondered for some of the harder problems, if teams picked, like, maybe not a neural network, but if they picked like any of these sort of heuristic, like any of these like loss function objective based approaches, and then just submitted the problem 5 times until they got the right answer, like with different random seeds.
You could. I mean, the other thing is, because a lot of those have requirements on the runtime, but you could train for a very long time, so you could train offline, or even I've seen some solutions which they try to prevent, but you build up a dictionary ahead of time. So you spend a really long time with an inefficient algorithm building up a dictionary, and then when you submit it, it basically knows all of the answers already, or at least...
Oh yeah, that's a very common... That might be less common now, but yeah, definitely when I was doing competitions, that happened frequently.
So you could, in theory, train the neural network very slowly for a very long time, and then at runtime, it goes very fast, where you don't know of a runtime algorithm that could run fast enough to answer their question.
Yep.
Interesting. I wonder how many would be solvable with that approach. Like if you went in solely with that being your strategy and you were just committed to knowing how to train neural networks that way really fast, like how many of the questions would be capable of even being approached, and then how many you could actually get good answers with? Yeah,
I mean, to answer it, you have to know like how many of those problems are just a composition of functions versus how many are real simulations. Like there are these questions like, play a game of Tetris, like, and you have to actually like drop the pieces and figure out what spaces are valid. And anything that has some kind of simulation aspect to it, you're not going to be able to do with a neural net. But if it's like some of these more geometric problems, where it's just like, here's a bunch of angles and you have to find this type of angle, then some kind of neural net could probably do pretty well. All right, time for Book of the Show. So I actually have a bunch of books, but here's the catch. There's only covers.
Oh.
So this is Parody O'Reilly book covers. So for people who don't know, there's a publisher called O'Reilly. They publish a ton of different books, everything from HTML, website design to game programming to Lua. They have like books on everything, and they all have sort of this similar cover style where there's usually some picture of some animal that's in this kind of pencil charcoal sketch style. Some kind of headline at the top, and then some type of adjective which never really makes sense, but it's just kind of there, and then a big title. And so this guy made a bunch of parody O'Reilly book covers, and they're absolutely hilarious. Just to give you guys some spoilers here, one is essential copying and pasting from Stack Overflow. Very useful book.
Putting the candidate through the same junk you went through. Useless whiteboard interviews.
Yes, useless whiteboard interview book. Expert resume-driven development.
Oh, this is good. Okay, well, anyways, don't spoil all these. These are funny.
Yeah, I won't spoil them all. Actually, I'm thinking about getting a T-shirt with one of these.
I don't know. Is that funny?
I think it's that.
Okay,
I mean,
all right.
The whiteboard interviews. I think I want a T-shirt of the whiteboard interviews for when I give interviews. Like I want to be wearing that shirt. Like I want to just have it at my desk and put it on, give the interview, and then take it back off.
Have you read the Twitter feed entitled Tech Worker?
No, I haven't.
It's somebody who obviously lives in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and works at one of the big tech companies. So they have like kind of sarcastic, entitled reasons why things are bad at their company. Like, I'm upset today's menu at work was all Mexican. I just got back yesterday from my villa in Puerto Vallarta. Why doesn't the new MacBook Pro come in gold?
MacBook. Oh man, that's awesome. This is really good. Entitled Tech Worker.
Yeah, if I knew the espresso machine was broken, I would have asked my Uber to stop at 4Barrel. If you're in the Bay, so this will make a lot more sense. A lot of these are specific to the San Francisco area.
Well, if you watch Silicon Valley, the TV show, then yeah, you'll find these hilarious.
Sometimes I don't even wait to agree on a LinkedIn endorsement swapping scheme. I just go out there and endorse people I don't even know.
That's so true.
Alan joined your company last week, but I think it's already gone downhill. My startup may have failed, but my self-congratulatory blog post reached #1 on Hacker News.
Oh man, these are amazing. Okay, I'll add a link to these in the news.
Whoever writes these is so very in touch with the culture.
Genius. That's awesome.
All right, my book is a fictional book, Hard Magic by Larry Correia. I don't know if that's how you say his last name. But I also had a recommendation from him before I talked about his book Monster Hunters International. So this is another, it's sort of similar, like, this is not a deep, thoughtful book. It's a kind of like really fun to read. You kind of feel like it's just a like junk food book, but it's good. I liked it. It's set in I guess it'd be the 20s, kind of like the mobster era, and like alternate reality, like what happens if around that time frame, like magic had been discovered. Like, you know how we had mixed scientific discoveries, like you kind of discover magic and people start kind of having magical abilities. It sounds really stupid, but if you like stick with it and read it, it actually is a fun read. But this author isn't really for everyone because he does spend a lot of time describing various guns in the book, like in detail. Like, this, he's really into guns. So every time there's a gun, it's not just the person grabbed a gun; they grabbed a very specific kind of gun. And so it's just interesting, like that's one of the things that he has a lot of detail about. And I'm pretty sure it's not very accurate to the actual 1920s. But it is kind of interesting, and it features like some of the work by Nikola Tesla and other people. And so I enjoyed it. Like I said, it wasn't the most thoughtful book I ever read, or I listened to it, but I did enjoy it. So if you're out there for a light, fun kind of listen, I would encourage you to check this out.
I was going to ask you if it was like a cerebral book, because at first I didn't know which way we were going. No. But yeah, so this is like lighthearted.
It's not a
kind of
complete comedy.
explore-
Like I recommended, I think last time I recommended a book, it was Red Shirts, which was like purely
Right.
just comedic.
I'm still going through that one. It's quite
Okay,
good.
so that one's
I
like
it.
really comedic. This one has like, I don't think it's meant to be funny. Like there are funny parts, I guess, but it's more just meant to be like you just watch like an action flick. It isn't supposed to make you wonder about have an existential crisis. I did not have an existential crisis after reading this book.
That's good. You didn't feel like you were actually a magician trapped in
Well, I did for a
Patrick's
little
body.
bit, but then I couldn't make the feather float with my wand, and so
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the fireball didn't work, and it ended badly.
anyways. And so like I said, I listened to this, and we've Audible has been a sponsor of the show, and so if you go to audibletrial.com/programming throwdown, you can get a 1 month free trial, which means you get a credit to have a book. And then you can cancel it when you're done and keep the book. And so if you've never checked them out before, I have a long commute, and I think you have a long commute now too, but I have a long commute. And so I am a paying customer of theirs and have been for a while. And I really enjoy listening to the books. I don't enjoy the commute, but when I am like have an off day or like on a Saturday, it's kind of like, oh, I didn't get to listen to my book today. And so that's kind of a bummer, but check them out if you haven't already. And thank you. A bunch of you already have. And so really thankful for you guys doing that. And if you like got a book that you like and we haven't talked about, feel free to send us a recommendation. Somebody did. Somebody wrote in and recommended some Brandon Sanderson books. So we might talk about those in the future.
Cool. We're also on Patreon.
And thank you for everyone who's been telling your friends. Someone randomly at work told me, I had a friend of mine recommend this podcast to me, Programming Throwdown. I downloaded it and started listening to it, and my jaw dropped when I heard your voice coming out of my earphones.
That's amazing.
So thank you guys for so at least one person told a friend about it. And thank you guys for spreading the word about Programming Throwdown and listening.
That's right. This is not Fight Club. You can tell all your friends about it.
Well, at least it's not the first rule.
Yeah, that's right. We would probably get beat up in a street fight with almost anyone.
Oh. All right, tool of the show.
Tool of the show. My tool of the show is amazing. I have yet to use it. Like I'm actually.
So you only
halfway
think it's
through the
amazing.
process. Well, but I mean, other people have used it, and I know it works. And so once I'm done getting through the process, I'm going to be really happy. So for the podcast, I was paying for an SSL certificate, and it's not that much money. It's I think like $20 a year or something like that. But basically, a variety of companies got together and said, "Let's make this free." And there's actually a ton of companies here. I'm not going to list all of them, but just Mozilla is one of them, Electronic Frontier Foundation, so on and so forth. And they got together and they made this thing called Let's Encrypt. And the idea is it's just free SSL certificates that are meaningful, right? They're not self-signed, right? I mean, they're signed and they're a trusted source and all of that. And so if you have a personal website, a business website, a small business website that's not encrypted, or if you're paying for encryption and you don't want to, you can use this Let's Encrypt. It's completely free, and it's not like a beta free kind of thing. Like the whole point of it is to be free forever. So it's amazing. I mean, it's and just to recap, if you don't know, I'm sure everyone knows this, but just in case, when you go to a website, there's HTTP and there's HTTPS. The S is, like I say, stands for secure. And so what happens is, under the hood, when you, send some information to that website, you encrypt the information, and then the website, decrypts it with the help of this sort of third party to mediate all of this. And so it's not something you can just do on the server by yourself. You need to, work with one of these groups to have a secure channel that is sort of authorized. And so Let's Encrypt will let you do that. So at this point now, there's no reason not to have a secure website, unless you are on Blogger. So our blog is on Blogger, and Blogger custom domains don't support HTTPS
Oh.
yet. So ironically, our blog isn't on HTTPS and can't be, which, is okay because you're not, logging in on our blog or giving your credit card or anything like that. But in case someone comes back and says, oh, programmingthrone.com isn't HTTPS. So it's we can't do it. I'm looking into sort of how to fix that. But at the moment, we're a little bit stuck.
We're programmers. We should write our own microservice blogging platform.
Yeah, well...
No, I'm just kidding.
I looked into moving off Blogger, and as you can imagine, this is episode 55. So we have a lot of content, a lot of comments, and moving all of that is not trivial. So,
well, we heard about AIs. Just make a TensorFlow to do it for us.
Yeah, I need to contact Joel and have Joel.
Oh yeah, give him a whiteboard interview. All right, mine is an iOS only game. I'm sorry, it does not. I did look in advance this time. I'm prepared. It is not available on Android, and it is not free, or it hasn't been free, at least that I've seen. And it's called Warbits, and this is an Advance Wars. I won't say clone because that sounds like an accusation. Very, very similar like game. So if you never played Advance Wars, I guess it was on Game Boy Advance and maybe Nintendo DS.
Yep.
One of the portable Nintendo consoles.
Yeah, I think there's one on 3DS as well.
Okay.
It's a franchise.
And this, I don't know exactly what you call it, but you have, people and they are on squares. You have military troops and it's you attacking another set of bad guys. It's just like a really fun, like a strategy game, but not like deeply strategic game.
Yeah, so these games are called SRPGs.
Oh.
It comes from I think it's either strategy or squad. I don't know what the S is. But yeah, I mean, if you like Advance Wars, Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, Shining Force, if you like these games, look up SRPG in the App Store, and there's a decent collection.
Oh, I never knew that's what they were called. So now I have something to look up. This is like Final Fantasy Tactics as well, but I feel like those games are different than this. Like they're more serious, and there isn't really a role playing to this. I mean, there is like a story, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, RPG just really means that, there's upgrades. RPG, like in this context, really just means that there are decisions and they are permanent. So,
but I don't remember in Advance Wars there being any like real permanent decisions. Am I misremembering?
I thought
like
that you could choose
battle to battle.
Like a unit.
It's okay. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Warbits is on iOS. If you're interested in that kind of game or you never tried it before, you can check it out. There's been several others that also do it, but try to kind of do it differently. And it just never kind of captured the nostalgia of Advance Wars. So this one does a really good job because it's basically a ripoff. I didn't say that. But like all the same basic units with the same basic traits and principles are there. And the story behind it is a little wonky, but as always, it's kind of laughable to see how these people try to come up with stories to justify what is just a fun game.
Yeah, like Advance Wars, there's one called like Burning Ruin or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the whole premise of that was there's like a flower, and if the petals all fell off the flower, like humanity's lost. And you're like, okay, come on, guys.
Yeah, so I think the story in this one, and I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, is instead of fighting real wars, people have decided to fight simulations of real wars. And so you're like a simulation general. And you're, like the world has gone pacifist, but they still feel like things need to be resolved using, it's very conflicted.
Okay.
So you can check it out.
I'll check it out. I love these type of games, so I'm definitely in.
All right. Time to talk about the thing that is going to get us lots of hate mail.
Yeah, I mean, we anticipate an incredible amount of hate mail. One disclaimer is...
No, actually, that's not...
These are all, I mean, things that either Patrick or I or both of us, they're all IDEs that we have used. There's a ton of IDEs that I'm sure we haven't used that could be great. But, these are mostly one-on-one, some of the IDEs that we've experienced. And we've gone through a lot. We're not married to a particular IDE, either of us. And so I think that's nice because together we have pretty good coverage on almost all the popular IDEs. So
I actually don't know that we'll get a ton of flame war talking about editors because I don't intend to state anything absolute. Well, maybe a couple of things. But instead I want to talk a little bit about like editor philosophy. So I think one of the things that to be productive as a programmer, the editor you choose should have like some common traits. One is that there should be some level of customization to it. That is that things can be shifted into a way that you like it. And there's a balance here where you'll hear people argue about if I make it so customized that when I go to someone else's computer, I can't get things done. And ultimately, you spend most of the time programming at your computer. So I feel like it's worth making it customized to you, but maybe not so much crazy customization that you're doing customization just for customization's sake. And that's probably a hard balance to strike. But don't go so far where you're spending more time updating and tweaking stuff than actually like doing your work. Like that's probably too much.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Like I usually, once maybe every year or so, I just say, okay, I'm going to take some time to like improve my workflow and improve my editor and things like that. But yeah, this shouldn't be something that you just do every week or every day. That'd be brutal.
And some people do. Some people are like, I will spend however much time necessary to create a way to shave off one extra keystroke in Vim or VI. And then, okay, sure. If that makes you happy, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. That's not the way I tend to operate.
Yeah. Same
the other thing I think when you're choosing an editor that you should think about is the searchability. And I mean a couple of things by this, but just as the ability to find things in the code, especially when you're in code that you don't work in a lot or is new to you. And I think this is really important. And this will separate out, in my opinion, what makes some of things not so good choices for people. And the other thing I mean about searchability is specifically, and I thought of this the other day when someone was talking about how they switched to using VI because they thought it was so much better. And in reality, like I kind of asked them a couple questions and it seemed like they were switching more to VI because they wanted to be able to say that they use VI, which, okay, that's fine. But they weren't very efficient in it and they weren't pursuing a way to be efficient. And the thing I kind of used as, at least for me, one measure of how efficient you're being in your code is how long it takes when you're looking at a piece of code you've never looked at before and you come to a usage of a class and you don't know what that class does and some method or a method, it doesn't matter. Some method's being called a function. How long does it take you to go from that function in that file to where that function is defined? So learning about what that function does, reading about the comments, all of that stuff. And I think you want to work to minimize that. So in some cases, your tool may or may not provide that out of the box. So some of the things we're going to talk about, like the IDEs, and we're going to talk about what integrated here means in a minute, but they let you do that very easily. Like it might be a right click and a go to definition or a button like an F3 that when you're on top of something, it takes you to the place in the code. So it has understanding about your code, but that isn't to say you have to use one of the integrated things. There are ways to do this in VI. Maybe we can talk about that, like C tags or whatever. But for me, the way I try not to be a mean person, but if you come to me and tell me like, oh, my solution for editor is better because VI is really awesome, I'm going to want to know like, oh, how do you have it set up? And I've seen people with incredible stacks of stuff that their tools and configuration and intuitiveness of the code where they really can bounce back and forth. And I've seen other people that when you ask them to handle this problem I've just described, they go to another window, they open the shell, they grep through a bunch of files, and they're trying to like manually inspect each line, looking for which one is most likely to be the one where it's defined. And to me, that's just, it takes you out of the context. It's too slow. It doesn't work for me.
Yep.
And I think if you are doing that, you should either seek to find a way to improve that or switch to another solution that might be better for you. Don't just do something because it's wearing the hair shirt is what I've heard it called for some programming languages where people used to wear a shirt made out of some animal hair that is like really itchy to remind them about like the fact that they were going through this punishment. And so some people do that. Like I'm a good programmer because I do things the hard way, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's never true.
Well,
I mean,
whatever. That's not for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you have to be able to, editors are made to edit files, but code is really not about files. It's really about this web of functions, and like how those functions are mapped to files. Like it depends on the programming language, but it could even be just arbitrary, and so like an editor that that if you have Vim or Emacs or one of these editors, and you only can look at one file at a time, then you're not really doing it right.
Yeah, and there's many ways to solve this problem, and I think asserting that your way is the best way is also just not cool. You're not helping. I think different people
totally
think differently. Some people think it's great to sit in front of a keyboard or to say that I can use a computer from 40 years ago that doesn't have the cursor key. Okay, great, sure, whatever. But the chance of me running across that in like my day-to-day is just really low. And I think it's also very good to try stuff occasionally to see if you like something better and to see if, hey, maybe I do fit in with the way this thing works. And instead of all editors needing to be usable by everyone, I think some of them have realized they just should be used by some people and that they'll just cater to those people. And I think that's perfectly fine. And I agree, Jason, we are calling this editor wars, but we're really talking about editing in the context of not writing a novel, but like editing code. So working in a code base, a Git repository, like those kinds of things all together. And I think that there are some solutions which you'll hear IDE, integrated development environment, or what I'll call like a stack or roll your own, where an integrated development environment, you typically have an editor where you can edit code, some notion of a project explorer or file explorer where you can kind of go to the different files that you have or classes in your code, some way to navigate, and then often has a way to invoke the compiler, or even the compiler is kind of built into the IDE. And all of that is done kind of within one executable that you launched once and kind of had that as the default configuration. A roll your own would be more something, we'll talk about in a minute, other solutions where it primarily is just editing of a single file, but then there may be ways for you to choose plugins or other applications or use something within Windows or Linux to kind of customize your window to have other features as well. And then you've kind of created a set of linking and plugins or found them on the internet, ways and shortcuts to go between the different programs that are together helping you do your code programming, debugging, compiling loop, pushing, all of that stuff. I think those are kind of the two approaches that I've seen.
Yeah, definitely. So just to knock a couple of things out, the simplest IDE is just a text editor. A pure text editor. So this is like Pico or Nano on Unix, or just Notepad or WordPad on Windows. And these things don't really know anything about code. They don't do any highlighting or anything. You can only look at one file at a time. But if you're really kind of desperate, like there's Notepad on every Windows machine. You're guaranteed it's going to be there. You can write anything in them, but we don't recommend.
Yeah, I think the thing that this fails is there isn't really customization options for the most part. Like you can't say
that's right.
It won't do things like when I go to the next line, automatically indent that line based on what I type. Like if I typed a brace, it needs to indent over. If I didn't, it needs to stay at the same spot. It doesn't necessarily understand like tab and shift tab for like getting rid of indentation. Just doesn't have those notions. So it isn't efficient for editing code and isn't really customizable. So as Jason said, last resort, you should pretty much, if you're using these, you should really look for something else.
Yep. And then there's what I call like IDE as a platform. And so this is where, as Patrick mentioned, you're going to have to do like a pretty decent amount of heavy lifting to get this where you want. And so this is, where the Emacs, the VI, and the Vim editors belong. You could argue Sublime and Atom are here as well, but we'll talk about them later because they're more sort of futuristic.
So I don't think these are IDE as a platform. I would refer to these more as like keyboard focused. So both Emacs and VI, for me, the big thing they share in common is saying that you should be able to do everything from your keyboard without having to lift up and go to the mouse.
So I've only ever, I take it back. I've used Curses Emacs before, but I'm definitely like a heavy mouse user, and I still use Emacs. Yeah, I think the big thing about this is it supports kind of everything. Like, for example, when TypeScript came out, there was syntax highlighting. When the language came out, there was an Emacs module. Like the developers of TypeScript released an Emacs module, and so. I guess TypeScript is a Microsoft thing, so Visual Studio would work. But the thing about Emacs is that it can edit almost any file and has syntax highlighting for almost every language. And because it's so extensible, and also because the bare bones Emacs is so poor.
You are going to start getting flame.
Well, no, I mean, I love Emacs, but I'll be the first person to say that, like, default Emacs kind of makes my eyes hurt. But, there's so many modules and so much support that it's just, you can do everything in Emacs well. I don't believe the same is true for outside of Emacs and Vim. Like, if you want to do Eclipse, but the project is a Node.js well, Eclipse actually is getting there. But, like, let's take, like, IntelliJ or something, and the project is Node.js, you're kind of hosed. And so I feel as if, like, as a developer, you have to make one of two choices. You either have to say, I'm going to do almost everything in Emacs, or you have to, generate sort of this ensemble of editors, like maybe Eclipse for most things, but then if you have C++, you have to use, Visual Studio or something.
But I mean, I think a hybrid approach is actually reasonable, and you can ease it somewhat. And a lot of people don't. I'm pretty sure it's true for both. But in Eclipse, you can have it support both Emacs and VI style text editing, and so you can drop it into so it handles normal behavior by default. But then there's a way to basically tell it to emulate as if you were in an Emacs or VI window for just your text editing place. And I feel
actually we should mention that. So people might not be familiar with this, but like, if you're like editing a doc in Microsoft Word or something, right? Like you would select a block of text with the mouse, and then you click the B to make it bold. And there's keyboard shortcuts like Control B and things like that. But they're designed. It's designed around the mouse. Like using Microsoft Word without a mouse would be super painful. But these editors like Emacs and Vim, as Patrick said, they're designed to work without a mouse. And so if you want to go to, line 1000 in Emacs, you would do escape GG 1000. And that sounds like kind of painful to have to remember that when you could just, scroll with the mouse wheel. But it actually saves a pretty decent amount of time. And some of the keyboard strokes are actually quite worth it to kind of memorize. So the catch with that is, if you're used to, escape GG, and that's your muscle memory has just attuned to that, then you go to Eclipse, you're just going to end up typing G's all over the place. Like this happened to me in the beginning. Like I'd just be editing a file, and all of a sudden I'd type 2 G's, and it's because I wanted to go to a line. And so you can actually customize. Most editors that we'll talk about let you support Emacs keys. And
I think that's the biggest difference about like Emacs and VI is they allow you, and I'm not going to get into which is better or worse. I tend to use VI, just never gotten into Emacs. So when I use VI or use one of these, I use VI. But I think that they allow you to have different ways of operating. So like Jason said, you can go to a specific line. When I used Eclipse initially, like I just never had a desire to go to a specific line. That wasn't the way I operated. Because it doesn't really support it natively. Or, I was reading some interesting stuff about VI where people were saying, one of the good things about not using the cursor keys and forcing you to using HJKL for cursor navigation is that it gets you into a different way of thinking. And then it allows you to, for instance, start getting used to, as you're saying, like going to relative line numbers or going to relative places within your code. And so your navigation becomes more intuitive about jumping whole lines instead of single lines at a time or whatever, or jumping sets of lines, or repeating actions a number of times instead of manually doing it every time. So reducing the number of keystrokes needed. And Emacs and VI are very powerful, both out of the box and with the level of customization of everything that they allow you to do in helping you reduce your keystroke count. And some of that requires you shifting your mindset for good or bad.
Yeah, it definitely is a learning curve, no doubt. But I feel this way about, coding and about email is, I spend hours every day doing either of those. And so if I could shave off 10%, it's significant.
Yeah, it's hard. It depends on me. Sometimes I'm cranking out code, and I'd agree with you, but there's a lot of other times where the limiting factor for me isn't how fast my fingers can push the code into the editor. right? Like I'm limited.
Absolutely.
I tend to, and it's just the nature of the work I do. I tend to need to actually think about the stuff I'm writing. And so it takes a little longer for each line to come out for me. And so in that regime, the editor doesn't get in my way. Not normally.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. I don't think typing faster is really helping anybody, but
no, it does, because there's sometimes you just really want to bang out like boilerplate code or whatever, and you just type, as fast as you can go.
Oh, yeah. Emacs has this like boilerplate thing where you can hit F3.
We're not going to play this game because you can say F3. Emacs or VI has insert, like just literally solution to any problem. Sure. You want to make your coffee from within Emacs? Thing. Great. There's a plugin for that. Sure. Yeah, I got it. But we'll do that the whole time.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Anyway, so there's Emacs VI, and then when Java came out, the thing about Java is Java had GUI, like had UI libraries that shipped with the language. So in other words, anyone who is programming in Java could make like a window on the screen and draw like menus and things like that, which had never really been done before. It used to be, sure, you have C++, but you need to download a bunch of libraries.
I don't know that it had never been done before, because I think some of the other more obscure languages had done it before. But it was kind of like,
oh yeah, there's like
first widespread
and TK and
widespread.
Yeah, sure, that's fair. So what happened is a lot of people at that time, there's sort of this explosion of visual developer tools, and IDEs are obviously one of those. And so there's NetBeans, Eclipse, and IntelliJ, which are all Java-based IDEs. And I used to use NetBeans. There was a time where Eclipse was very slow and crashed all the time, like early days of Eclipse. But as soon as Eclipse became stable, I switched to Eclipse. And I've never used IntelliJ.
I haven't. I was going to say that JetBrains is like the people, and we talked about them a while ago, having the kerfluffle with changing how they were charging people. I've just never used it. I know a lot of people, though, who really say it doesn't matter how much money you want to charge. Like, this is totally worth it. But no, I've mostly used Eclipse for my Java.
Yeah, I've also used Eclipse. And Eclipse actually is starting to get Emacs status, where if you're a programming language inventor and you don't support Eclipse through some plugin or something, you are kind of doing yourself a disservice. And so you're starting to see a lot more support now for everything from TypeScript to Groovy to Scala. They just are providing these sort of it's actually cool. In Scala, you can actually click on a button in the website that launches something in Eclipse that installs the Scala plugin. Like, I don't know exactly what's going. Yeah, it does sound like a security hole, doesn't it? I don't know exactly what's going on there, but it's basically like a one-click thing from the Scala website, which is pretty cool. I don't think
I'm just harassing you.
It's the same as when you go from iTunes. Yeah. So it's legit. But the Eclipse. I'm actually starting to use Eclipse more, and I might completely switch from Emacs to Eclipse, because Eclipse is that was my big fear with all of these, is that if it didn't support a language, I would have to use Emacs anyways. And but now Eclipse is getting to the point where it supports.
And it is true that like you should never believe you're going to just stay in a single application. I mean, even in Eclipse, you might have to drop into something else to manage your project. I mean, you can open the project file, but there might be a better way of managing your project or handling Git. Like, for instance, there are Git plugins for Eclipse, but I never use them. I always just drop back to the command line to do it. That's just because how I wanted to do it. And so I think a hybrid approach is still reasonable for all of these, where you still need some sort of stack or roll your own, whatever you call it, the set of tools you're going to use. But the other thing is, so far, I think all the ones we've talked about have been cross-platform, except for like Notepad, which is only on Windows. But Emacs, sure. VI, NetBeans, Eclipse, IntelliJ, or I know at least Eclipse and IntelliJ, I think are cross-platform. So OS X, Linux, Windows.
Yep.
NetBeans as well. But all of these will run on, kind of any platform you are. But I will say one of the caveats is things like VI and Emacs. It takes a little longer when you're on like Windows And OS X isn't too bad with like something like Homebrew, or I guess it used to be Macports was the way you used to do it. But getting the normal Linux tools there, but they kind of assume, and people, if you look for help in VI or Emacs, are going to kind of assume you're on a OS X or Linux system. And they're going to suggest you to use tools that are specific to those systems. And then whether or not they're available on Windows just depends.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, there's a section, I made a section called corporate IDEs. And so
these are NOS cross-platform.
Yeah, that's right. These are your Visual Studio and your Xcode. I've used Xcode a decent amount. Xcode's okay.
I dislike Xcode, but Visual Studio, the last time I used it, had gotten a lot better than when I had first used it, and I've heard it's gotten even better, so I feel comfortable saying Visual Studio is probably pretty good now.
Yeah, I mean, Xcode fails the, I want it to support many things test. In other words, like if I'm in Xcode...
You're making an OS X application or an iOS or something within the Apple ecosystem.
Sure. But even that notwithstanding, if I'm doing that, I'm writing this application and I write a JSON file. Now I want to open that JSON file in something that feels good, where it actually does folding of the JSON structure and things like that. I'm pretty sure Xcode will just open it in a text file. And I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like about JSON specifically. But I've had this issue with both of these, Visual Studio and Xcode, where there's going to be, some file it doesn't understand. And because the plugin support isn't there, it's going to be just a pure text file. And I'm going to have to switch to Eclipse or Emacs or one of these other things. If I want to...
If it's really something going to understand the file, yeah. Also, I think some of these have different levels of integration. Like Visual Studio is mostly geared towards its own way of describing a project, and Xcode similarly. You need to have an Xcode description of the project, at least as far as I know. But things like Eclipse too, like depending on what project management your team is using, it has support for most of the big ones, but it can run into issue, but it's not as bad because it isn't assuming that it's a very specific project description.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing your development correctly in Eclipse, you should be able to just throw away the project file, and it should just be able to just be regenerated. So if you're using like Maven, Gradle, CMake, or any of these systems, you can just auto-generate the Eclipse kind of project whenever. But you're right, for the other ones, I mean, CMake can technically do Xcode and Visual Studio, but it's not as good. Like, you'll typically have to make changes to the project file.
So there are some new editors that are making inroads for people liking. The first one is Sublime, which is written, as far as I know, by like a single guy, and it came out a few years ago. I guess we should have looked it up, but it's a free to try, and it gives you a warning if you don't buy it. So you're supposed to buy it after some amount of time. And the nice thing about Sublime is it has a pretty good ecosystem around it for plugins and understanding code natively. But it doesn't try to integrate really, as far as I can tell, with any sort of like project understanding. So you can point out a folder and it'll see a folder structure on disk, but it doesn't try to kind of integrate with your project structure and allow you to like add new files to your project, kind of in an intuitive way. But it has a nice like overview on the right side where it shows like your code, but like shrunken down, because it turns out you can recognize what the code structure, where you are in the file, just by like having looked at it. I didn't really think about it before, but when I saw that and I used it, I was like, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, that makes sense. One sad thing about Sublime, I just looked it up. It's not open source.
It's paid, and it's written by, it's like a company, right? So it's not open source.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the exception. Maybe we should have put it in the corporate IDs, but all of the Java ones we mentioned, Eclipse, NetBeans, IntelliJ, Emacs, Vim, are all open source. And, I mean, are you really going to be hacking on Emacs? Probably not. But the fact that it's open source means that if, some new language takes over and it just becomes super popular, like it's kind of happening now with React, where it's this JSX file that has like HTML and stuff embedded in it. Like if something like that happens and really starts to take off, and you join a company and they said, okay, you have to write these JSX files. Sublime, without Sublime being
but the parts of it that do that are where you can write them or get modules that are open source. So it has the right hooks in place. It would be like if you wanted to have it have, I don't know, some sort of new feature that wasn't there. I
like some new
or it goes deprecated and the person doesn't release it open source, and then like you can't maintain it. But Sublime came up because it was known for being really, really fast for a graphical editor.
Yeah, right. It has some pretty cool features. I like the little like.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to describe. I was doing a poor job of it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Another new kid on the block is Atom. I've actually been using Atom a lot lately. It's pretty awesome. So a couple of awesome things about Atom. One is it works over SSH, so you can actually point it at a SSH repository and you can edit files over SSH, and it just makes that experience completely painless. So it also has some kind of searching, which also works for the SSH. Like, I don't know what sort of black magic is going on there, but the remote development is pretty amazing.
It's also like known for, I guess it's all written in JavaScript, and so you can kind of see, it's basically rendering. We talked about this before, I think, a little. It's not called embedded, but it's a like native JavaScript app. So like it hooks in natively, but is all just running kind of JavaScript. So you can see how it's choosing to do the rendering and then like alter it if you're so inclined. So it's saying it runs on Electron, which is one of the frameworks for building apps using JavaScript and web technologies. And it's made by the same people who make GitHub.
That's right. Yeah. And it's all of the sort of visual features of the editor are just HTML and CSS. So a ton of people have made themes. Like I like this, and I'm totally forgetting the name, but I have a certain theme in Emacs that I really like. And someone basically just cloned that. Yeah,
I should say almost all of these have themes. Even VI, I don't know about Emacs because I don't use it, but even VI you can find essentially themes for, like ways to kind of have it have a color scheme or palette that you like. But I do like the one that I guess initially the first one I really encountered it was in Sublime, that like default color scheme that Sublime chose in dark. I really liked that.
Yep, that's actually similar. I use Clarity, the Clarity color theme in Emacs, and it's also a dark theme. In general, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I feel like dark themes are just way better on the eyes. So to explain, dark theme is where the background is black
or dark,
and the text is a bright color, as opposed to what you're used to when you read things on the web or something like that.
So now some languages are built in together with their editors. So this would be like MATLAB. When you open up MATLAB, you come right to like the console and you can start doing MATLAB operations, or they have a file explorer built in to like operate on MATLAB projects. It's not to say you can't write those in another editor, but they kind of ship their own, and it isn't really meant to support things that aren't about MATLAB.
Yeah, right. Yep. There's RStudio for R. It's very similar. There's IPython Notebook. Same kind of idea.
I think more like Spider would be like a Python-specific editor. We should talk about IPython another time. It's called something else now, IPython Notebook.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Jupyter, which we should talk about because I've actually come across several instances of that now. It's catching on a lot, and I really like this approach. But I think more like Spider is something which is, and there are others.
That's a good point. But so the point, the overall point here is when you're language specific, then you can do some unique things. Like, for example, in MATLAB, there's a section of the editor where you can see all of the global variables. And that only makes sense because you're writing in MATLAB. Like, I mean, they wouldn't be able to do that for every language.
Well, it would just be, you wouldn't typically find it because it'd be really hard to support.
Yeah, like, I don't even know what that would mean. I mean,
because like if you have Python and you had like a Python console and you had variables, you could have something tracking the current variables in scope.
Yeah, and so there is that. There's a Qt IPython thing, which is kind of like that. But again, that's like the editor is Python.
Right, but it would be harder to do that for like C++. Like it would only make sense if you're currently debugging an application or Java.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, that's like one example. But there's other things where like that editor can provide something that only works because it's running MATLAB.
There are also lots of language-specific ones for the Lisp and functional languages as well. but I don't use
Oh, I
them
didn't know
routinely
that.
enough to be up on like what the best ways of using them are. So anytime you have kind
Yeah,
of
that
like
makes sense.
the interactive prompt, things like Python, MATLAB, a lot of the Lisps have this. Clojure has it, where you have a command prompt and you're typing stuff in and you can develop that way. You can do some interesting stuff with language specific features versus something that's compiled and run like Java or C++. Those features don't make a lot of sense for.
Yeah, right. Yep. So there's some editors that we've used in the past
Are no
that,
longer with us.
Are dead. Yeah. So CodeBlocks is one. CodeBlocks was really cool before CMake and these other build systems came out. The thing about CodeBlocks was you had this CodeBlocks project, and under the hood, they would sort of figure out what to do if you're on Windows, if you're on Linux, if you're on Mac. And so you could just I could take this CodeBlocks project with the source files and everything and copy it to someone who's running Windows, and they could just install it with CodeBlocks, and it would build a Windows program instead of a Mac program. That was super cool, but the cool part of that was actually the cross-platform Makefile system, not the editor. The editor was not that great. And so once CMake came out, it kind of torpedoed CodeBlocks. Another one is Borland Builder. I actually never used this other than in school. I only used this when they were teaching C++. Did you ever use Borland?
I think very, very limited, like once or twice, because it was on a computer I used and I just wanted to try it out.
Okay, yeah. So when we were learning C++, we learned on Borland Builder, and it was terrible, but it died a painful death. And the other one is Free Basic. I don't know. What was your first language?
C,
Patrick.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean,
That
I
was
did
your
some
first
stuff in Basic,
so
but I kind of put more like following examples and making kind of play things a little bit in Basic, QBasic.
Oh yeah.
But the first one I really
Okay.
learned and understood from a language perspective was C.
Okay, I'm in the same way as you then. So actually for me it was C++, but yeah, so Basic was just kind of one that, I just made little dummy apps that I copied out of a book. And so I used Free Basic, but I mean, I'm not saying Free Basic is none of these are actually dead. You could probably get Borland Builder, and CodeBlocks and Free Basic are still around, but they're just kind of dead to us. So actually I had this book. It was like a choose your own adventure book. But to know what page to go next, you had to enter in this Free Basic program on your
What?
computer and
Sounds
then
awesome.
run it, and it would tell you the answer. It was so cool.
But you should just be able to do it in your head, right? Or was it so complicated that you couldn't?
No, it was like a
Oh, okay.
recursive function. You couldn't, yeah. But the fact you would type this in and then you'd hit go and it would.
And I
say,
saw Python the hard way. That
after,
sounds
a
like Basic
minute.
the insane way.
Yeah, it was Basic the insane way. But yeah, I mean that was pretty cool. I wish they kind of did more like that, where they integrated. I mean, now as adults, it's not interesting, but for kids, I think it would be great.
So you were saying that you did TypeScript in Eclipse. What else do you use when you write JavaScript? I don't write much JavaScript, so I don't really know.
Oh, well, I've never done TypeScript in Eclipse. I know that there's a plugin now, but all my JavaScript I've done
okay.
using
All right.
Emacs. So
I didn't know if there was a preferred way. I assume something like Atom is really tailored to that because they flaunt that feature.
yeah, maybe.
So if you have a good, write us in and tell us if you write JavaScript day to day, tell us what you're using.
Yeah, or anything. If you use any editor we haven't mentioned, post on Facebook, post on the blog, post on G+ and things like that, and let us know, because we'll definitely we'll do if there's something really cool, we'll do
we'll make a tool of the show,
show
sponsored by someone else, or sponsored is the wrong word, featuring some other guests.
sponsored by you. Sponsored
The
by you.
Patreon. I don't know. So thanks everyone for
Right.
listening. Our viewership continues to go up. We have some more interviews kind of scheduled, but I think we're going to try to cut them down a little and probably go to something a little less frequent, because we enjoy talking to you guys. And I realize I think we had 2 episodes in a row that were interviews, and I really had a buildup of
right.
tools of the show and books I wanted to share. So we're going to probably try to get hearing the normal flow of the episode a little more frequently.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so many more languages. I'm dying to learn Julia. That's going to be my
one
goal
I've been
now
working on is Elm. Oh,
I've never heard of Elm. Okay, so we definitely have two really cool shows coming your way.
Till next time.
See you later. The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.